play the, okay, well let me just, I'm supposed to talk about Israel and terrorism, and what I'll do is start with some film clips from a completely different film, which is one that we certainly got a huge negative reaction from the PLO on, and Israelis all love. So, and this was a film that I produced and directed for CNN called Winning the War on Terrorism, and the idea of the film was to look at how other countries have fought terrorism over the decades. We focused on the IRA in Northern Ireland and England. We focused in France. Obviously, we did a lot of shooting in the U.S. We filmed in Spain, and I spent about 3 weeks in Israel doing the Israeli portion.
What year?
This is about 2 years ago. So what I'm going to do is show just the two sort of teases at the top of the film, which will give you a sense of the larger film, and then I'll just show the Israel portion. So why don't we kill the overhead?
Right there.
And then just show chapter 1 and 2.
From CNN Presents, this is a CNN 25th Anniversary Special Edition.
It's a war against democracy. We should be very, very tough.
How do other countries fight terrorism?
When 9/11 happened, what the Europeans basically said to us was, welcome to our world.
What can Washington learn from them?
There are things you don't do.
From battlegrounds around the world, the secrets to fighting terror.
The one who wants to kill you, kill him first.
From the interrogation cell.
You know that he is the key to the next bomb, and it all depends on you.
To the streets.
The police in Northern Ireland, they knew about this press. The area eventually became completely paranoid.
Tonight, learning how to win the war on terror.
Welcome to this CNN 25 special report. I'm David Ensor. When 4 deadly explosions ripped through London's subway and tore apart a double-decker bus loaded with passengers, the attacks became just the latest grim reminder that there are many fronts in the war on terror, that many nations have been fighting terrorism for decades. And it's just that type of experience and painful lessons others have learned over the years, and sadly more recently too, that could be invaluable to the U.S. fight. Over the next hour, winning the war on terrorism. It's a search for answers and options from veteran international spies, soldiers, cops, and judges, their successes, and how America can avoid their mistakes. When we took the guide to the lady's flight, she was screaming about a bomb, and we realized we were in a dangerous situation, and we were able to catch the terrorists who were convicted.
In your country, they check somebody when he goes out of the shopping mall, whether he installed something. Here, they check you before you go in, whether you're carrying a bomb or something.
A police chief in Tel Aviv, a cop in Belfast. What can they teach America about defeating terrorists? More than you might suppose. We tend to think of the 9/11 attacks as a unique, history-changing event. First international terrorism on U.S. soil. Casualties in the thousands. Attacks that caught the nation off guard. No doubt about it, Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and the like are a new breed. An invisible, stateless foe with global reach, adept at using the internet to plot and recruit, determined to acquire weapons of mass destruction.
My resolve is steady and strong about winning this war that has been declared on America. It's a new kind of war.
The administration's new kind of war on terrorism has included dramatic, sometimes deeply controversial steps. A war in Afghanistan, a preemptive war in Iraq, a massive new Homeland Security Department, a Patriot Act with greater intrusive powers, captives in Guantanamo Bay largely unprotected by American laws. All part of the new balance between liberty and security.
We're going to have to check you, okay?
But is war really the right idea? And can it really be won? I much prefer thinking of it as disease. It's something that's part of life, it's something we have to live with, but unfortunately, we're not going to be able to eliminate.
But if it is a disease, it is not a new one. Mass casualty attacks have long been the weapon of choice for terrorists. There are nations that have been responding to it for decades. Over time, they have found that some tactics work, others do not. Counterterrorism has a history.
When 9/11 happened, what the Europeans basically said to us was, welcome to our world. We've been trying to tell you about this for a long time, that what threatened us threatened you. Now you understand.
But before you can learn to fight terrorism together with other nations, you need to agree on what exactly you are fighting.
What's your definition of terrorism?
I feel that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
That's the view of an unrepentant IRA bomber, a view no doubt shared by some Palestinians in the occupied territories and by supporters of Osama bin Laden, the view that terrorism can be legitimate if the cause is just.
For our report, we will use a simple definition of terrorism, the use of violence against civilians or non-combatants for a political goal. We're not going to examine the merits of causes here, whether they're right or wrong. We will look at the tactic of terrorism and how to stop it. We will hear from a British spy master, a former terrorist, and the cops who were trying to stop him. We will learn from a former Israeli prisoner who now works on security for the Palestinians, and from the French judge who locked up terrorists like Carlos the Jackal. One thing counterterrorism experts worldwide agree on: Islamic fundamentalist terrorism is not going to be defeated soon.
My conviction is they're trying to plan another big attack here. They're trying to gain surprise, which is their friend in all of this. And they only have to be lucky once.
So it matters plenty how others fare against terrorists, and it matters what has worked for them in the past. Some of their strategies and tactics could be part of our future.
So let's
When we come back,
skip
what
a
can
couple
a
chapters ahead. And I think it's either the 5th or the 6th chapter, I believe. You can just skip ahead. Go to 4.
This is the other face of terrorism.
A metal nut penetrated my head from this side.
On July 31st, 2002, Hebrew University student Maya Segal went with a friend to eat lunch at a school cafeteria on the Jerusalem campus. A bomb exploded.
My right eye is not just closed, I don't have an eye. And they had to take off part of the brain because they took out this metal nut.
You have 1 ear, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Segal was taken to Hadassah Hospital's trauma ward, where most Israeli civilian victims of terrorist attacks have been treated.
There's no part that is immune. The particles are flying all over the body.
9 died at Hebrew University, 90 were injured. Since 2001, more than 1,000 Israelis have died in terrorist attacks. With a population of 7 million, that's the equivalent of almost 43,000 Americans. Deputy Prime Minister Ehud Olmert was the mayor of Jerusalem.
I was in every one of the sites where terror took place. 2 minutes, 3 minutes later, when the bodies were still very warm and the blood was still spilled.
The carnage from Palestinian suicide bombers has prompted Israel to take extreme steps for a democracy.
Is there any question about the legitimacy of killing someone who is described as a rolling bomb, that is someone that is on his way to commit a terrorist action? Go out, reach out for him and kill him.
And that's what Israel does. Targeted assassination is one of its most controversial tactics, shunned in public by most democratic governments, but not by Israel. On this night, a sniper squad is going out on a reconnaissance mission, tracking suspects. But when an arrest is deemed too dangerous, targeted assassination means that terrorists are hunted down and killed without a trial. The most prominent Palestinian to be assassinated, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, the paraplegic spiritual leader of Hamas, whom the Israelis accuse of ordering suicide bombings. Yaakov Peri, head of Israel's internal intelligence agency Shin Bet for 7 years, makes no apologies for Israel's methods.
The one who wants to kill you, and you are sure that he wants to kill him first. If buses with innocent children are getting exploded every day in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, so it's an effective means, and we shouldn't be ashamed.
But it is an imprecise weapon that takes innocent civilians along with the target. In fact, during the time that 1,000 Israelis have died from terrorist attacks, well over 3,000 Palestinians, militants as well as innocent bystanders, have been killed by Israeli forces. Even within Israel, there is heated debate over whether the killing may lead to more terrorism in the long run. Yaakov Peri hints at the internal discord within Israeli security circles.
I'm not sure that I can justify every targeted assassination, but as a method, I justified it.
One indication it's been an effective tactic: when the militant organization Hamas negotiated with Israel for the current ceasefire, its first request was that the assassinations stop. Military force is not the only tactic in the Israeli arsenal.
You know that he is the key to the next bomb, and it's a matter of hours. You don't have that much, and it all depends on you.
Breaking the will of a suspected terrorist was a specialty of Shimon Roma, former chief Shin Bet interrogator.
In certain points, you feel that a punch will be very helpful. But I'm sorry, but we can't do it this way, these days.
Romak has interrogated many hundreds of suspects and personally broke 3/4 of them, he says.
You need to be a good actor. Sometimes you have to act like you are very much angry, sometimes that you are very much friendly, but not give him your real feelings. You let him sail with you into the ocean of small talk. In a special moment, you ask a question.
The punishment starts with arresting the family, frightening and threatening for weeks.
Mohammed Daklan has been on the other side of the interrogation room and spent 4 years in Israeli jails. Now he is a minister in the Palestinian Authority, and his old foe needs his help. Part of his work is to keep his fellow Palestinians from attacking Israel. Daklan believes Israel's tough approach will fail unless it acknowledges the motivation of Palestinians fighting Israel.
You can understand how the 500,000 Palestinian prisoners were killed against Israel. You will find sort of a personal reason with each of them that pushed them into doing what they did. It could be that they arrested their mother, or one of their relatives was killed, or his home was demolished.
Israel defends its tough tactics, but there are limits. Its legal system has set clear boundaries. Targeted assassinations are legal. Torture is not. Abu Ghraib, say Israeli officials, could not happen here.
You fight the war, you need to win the war, but not at all costs. There are things you don't do.
Dan Meridor is a former Knesset member, a former Minister of Justice.
Democracy fights terrorism with one hand tied behind its back. It's much more difficult, but if we don't do it this way, we lose our nature of democracy. We lose our democratic way of life.
For Israel, it is a constant struggle, protecting itself while not losing its identity. Here, that also means refusing to cower in the face of terrorism.
And if they will destroy another discotheque, restaurant, or bus, we will still go on buses, we will still go to the same restaurant, we will dance in the same discotheque. We shouldn't give terrorism any chance to win, to break our souls, to break our spirit. Never.
At the Hebrew University cafeteria, Maya Segal is now a regular.
It's difficult for me, but I feel I must do it.
Refusing to let the terrorism she faced define her.
A lot of people ask me, what happened to you? And if they don't know me, I simply say, I got exploded. And they go like, what? It's not funny. How can you joke about it? Sometimes there is nothing else to do.
When we come back, Spain struck.
So, another happy subject. So really, I just want to answer any questions I can about this and related subjects, stuff that grew out of the last session. This was a tough film. The Spanish take a completely different approach, which actually Jacob Perry described to me as it's the hugger terrorist approach, which is very much let's try and build better relations with the Muslim community, et cetera, in Spain, and we'll see how that works. The British tradition is very strong. The French is also equally tough. But it was a really interesting film to make. It's really just fun to make. Sir.
David, do you think that the fact that we haven't had a lot of terrorism in the States is just by luck, or we're doing something right, or is it coming? What's your reading?
Well, there's no question that it's coming. I think all the real national security experts, say it's not if, it's when. Obviously, the people that I know say, look, they test us, they look for our weak spots, and they push and we push back. I mean, clearly, there's a lot of things that have probably been stopped from happening because of efforts that we take. But Al-Qaeda takes a very, very, very long look at these things, and there's no question that they're trying to do whatever they can, and if it takes them 10 years to do it, they will try. I mean, the whole historical perspective. I mean, the Spanish bombings, when they dug up the videotapes from that apartment that were there, and they found the statements of the Spanish bombers, they were talking about how outraged they were about the loss of Al-Andalus. And Al-Andalus was the Muslim community of Spain, probably the height of Muslim culture, and they were angry about something that had been lost, that disappeared 800 years ago. So the whole view of time is very different, and I think there's probably been some luck. There's clearly been some things stopped, but that doesn't make me feel any safer.
Do you think that some of these Muslim clerics do they sincerely believe in this stuff, or are they using it as a convenient conduit to accumulate power?
Both. I mean, no question that some of them believe in this stuff, and I think, really, in terms of final, if there's any way to finally stop Islamic terrorism, I don't think there's anything. I mean, we obviously have to protect ourselves as best we can. Situations like Afghanistan are clearly merited, but in the end, to me, this has to do with a war within Islam, a war within the moderate and the extreme. That's the only way this ends, and one of the great shames is that very few Muslim clerics, even the moderate ones, have had the bravery to step up and say, not in my name. Your interpretation of the Quran is wrong, even though vast majority of Muslims do not support this kind of stuff.
It would be very hard for me to go and visit all these countries with my Israeli passport that you visited, and I'm really curious about the last statement that you made. How much is it that from the people that you met in the street, not to the camera, people that didn't want to say to the camera what they feel like, that you got the feeling that they really do want this bloodshed ending? Because I'm sure that you, as you described earlier, that you can find those in Israel, in the States, in Europe, in many countries, but how much is it that you find, how much hope do we have?
I think my anecdotal thing isn't really relevant. I mean, I certainly have my own views, but there are, for example, very sophisticated polling of Palestinian attitudes done by Palestinian pollsters, in particular a guy named Khalil Shikaki, who spends half of his year teaching at Brandeis, among other places, but he lives in Ramallah, and his brother was in fact at one point the head of Islamic Jihad and was assassinated. And he is an extraordinary social scientist, and his polling is regarded by all sides as completely accurate. And his polling of Palestinian attitudes demonstrates this very clearly, especially at signal moments. Right after Gaza, the withdrawal from Gaza, his polling of the Palestinians showed that for the first time there was a higher percentage of Palestinians who cared not about the occupation, but just about jobs, money, simple lifetime things. I mean, life matters. So, I mean, those polls have shown, yes, when there's more violence, attitudes go exactly where you expect them to. But when there's calm and there's a period of peace, Palestinian attitudes have been shown by these polls to be in favor of an end of bloodshed, peace, two-state solution, whatever you want to call it.
You used a comment in the previous session which I hear in the media frequently, and that's this concept of proportionate or disproportionate response. In terms of the understanding you have of the mindset of the various groups out there, what is an appropriately proportionate response to some of these activities?
Well, I mean, one of Sharon's top aides was interviewed last week about last summer's war, and he said, look, you know, this is how Sharon would have acted. It was a cross-border incident. There have been hundreds of these. We would have reacted the same way. We would have bombed, we should have bombed the crap out of whatever Hezbollah thing that we could find, have that go on for a week, stop, never send in the ground troops. I agree with him on that particular case. And you know, the mistake that Nasrallah made was he didn't understand where Israel was. Gilad Shalit had just been, a month or a few weeks before, had been captured and taken into Gaza by Hamas, where he still is. Olmert was incredibly weak. Olmert was not a war hero. He was the first Israeli politician who wasn't a war hero of some kind to be the prime minister. And he obviously felt like he had to act tough, and he didn't know enough about whoever drew up the military plans to realize that they were going to be a disaster. So.
Kind of a two-part question. One is, what role do you think the nation states have behind what appears to be stateless border with this pair, particularly Saudi Arabia and Iran? And second question is, if you were president, how would you handle the Iranian situation?
Oh, that's a really good one. Well, first of all, the answer, clearly there is some nation-state support. I mean, Ahmadinejad and the Revolutionary Guards are clearly, have been since the beginning, very close to Hezbollah and very involved. There is also, what I was doing down in South America was looking at this part of Paraguay and Brazil called the Tri-Border, which after Iran, this little town of Ciudad del Este is the next most important financing point for Hezbollah. You're down there literally in the jungle, and it's just the most bizarre place you've ever seen in your life, because you're there and all of a sudden a woman in a hijab walks past and there's the Beirut Cafe, and it's really strange. In answer to the second, and Saudi Arabia, to me there's clearly a huge amount of individual support and a lot of money, but not state support, and that's how I would differentiate. I think Iran is really the only one where you can point to it very clearly and say there's state support. I think Syrians probably would if they had any money, but they give state support of other kinds.
Is the Saudi is this lack of clamping down and forming state support from Saudi Arabia, or do they have the power as a state to do
I think there's, the Saudis have tried to kill as many Al-Qaeda people as they can, and they're fighting it. One of the top goals of Al-Qaeda is to overthrow the House of Saud. So they're fighting it. So I wouldn't regard it that way, but they have huge internal political problems. Now, the Iran question is a really existential one, because on one hand, something like 60-70% of the population of Iran are under the age of 30. There was this huge post-Khomeini's return baby boom, and by all accounts, the vast majority of those, just want their MTV. They're not part of this. The local elections, since Ahmadinejad got elected, part of the reason that Ahmadinejad got elected is because all of the opposition candidates, or vast majority of them, got banned, along with the independent newspapers, and so people just decided, hey, we're not going to vote. So who got elected? The wacko. But in all the local elections since his election, his party's been trounced. When there is an honest, opportunity to essentially vote. So on one hand, if my friends, one of my friends happens to be the most decorated case officer in the history of the CIA, and he was the guy who was acting station chief when the Shah fell, and anyway, interesting guy. And he's who I really try to pick the brain of on Iran. And he said, look, on one hand, you let demography take its course. You let politics. There is still a somewhat sort of democracy with an asterisk in Iran, where if you can let demography take its course, that's the best thing. On the other hand, these people are nuts. The ones who actually are in charge right now, and those mullahs and Ahmadinejad, the notion of them with a nuclear weapon is a pretty scary notion. So his point of view is you have to try to let demography work. And also, just on a purely military level, let's say you want to go in there and take out the nuclear sites. There's no guarantee you're going to find them. They're deeply buried. There's no guarantee you're going to get them. And you're going to kill who knows how many civilians, because a lot of this stuff is put into civilian areas. So what you end up doing is you don't know if you've actually stopped the problem, and then you've turned that whole population, the whole demographic thing is then gone. Because once you start bombing in your country, you just hate the people who drop the bombs. So, if you can do it through demography, if you can let, I don't think the Pentagon will ever let Cheney go to war. I'm sorry, Bush, go to war in Iran, because they're so upset about what happened in Iraq, and every time you see some Iran thing, Seymour Hersh is leaked to in about 10 seconds, and there's a Pentagon leak very quickly.
I mean, it seems so naive, but what is Israel to do on a daily basis when there's absolutely no one to negotiate with, almost? Because with within the Arab states, they're now fighting amongst themselves between Hamas and, Hezbollah's one side, and then Hamas and Fatah are on the other side, and yet the civility of not harming innocence is gone. I mean, it just doesn't, it's just a war against numbers. So from Israel's point of view, what should they be doing? And what can we learn from that? Because I'm convinced it's going to be coming on our shores sooner than we think.
Become a what?
It's going to, the terrorism will be coming on our shores sooner, more, in greater numbers.
Yeah, well, another thing is, in answer to an earlier question about why there hasn't been stuff in this country, I think just to get back to that point is that one of the reasons is that, unlike, say, Great Britain or in France, where Muslim immigrants are really third-class citizens, in this country, most American Muslims live really good lives. They're not marginalized. They are part of the melting pot. They do get ahead. They live in the suburbs. So there's the amount of anger in terms of American Muslim anger, resentment is much, much lower compared. Now, what is Israel to do? I mean, as Professor Spiegel said this morning, we all know what the deal's going to be. It's just a matter of how do you politically get each side strong enough whereby they can sell it to their people. Now, everyone knows there will be no right of return. You will have to give up certainly all the settlements that are not contiguous to Israel proper. Probably you got to give up East Jerusalem. So, look, I'm as far as I'm concerned, the old city could be brought to you by Coke. That's completely heretical to say. But for me, if the state of Israel is going to continue to exist, if that means giving up something very painful, I'm willing to give it up. But that's me, and I think that I think Israel has to, on one hand, stay very resolute and stay very strong. On the other hand, whenever it has an opportunity to negotiate, to open a door, you have to use the carrot and the stick. I mean, our government has believed only in the stick. And I think, in Israel's case, they have to keep trying to do it, but it's a hell of a problem.
I'm thinking more of Israel and other cases. Counterterrorism team that depends on a reliable informant network to not lose any missing lives and seems that the Israeli network is not doing as it used to be, or is that wrong?
You'd have to ask someone from Shin Bet. I mean, you know, that's my other card. No, I really don't know the answer to that. But I mean, on the other hand, you could argue there's been almost no successful suicide bombings. It's not just because of the wall, the fence, whatever you want to call it. You know, Israeli intelligence is really good. The networks they run, the electronic intelligence, the phone taps. I mean, they're really good. So you know, I don't really know, but I suspect. I mean, I know, you know, some of the people that they try to approach in Lebanon, who they use as sources. I mean, I don't know actual ones, but you know, they're particular sects. I mean, they go after the Armenians, they go after the, you know, whatever. It's a very small sects, but I mean, they're really good, and I just don't know.
Yeah, you work for CNN. In your opinion, what
I did work for CNN.
What do you think today, if CNN is giving the honest report about Israel?
Well, all I know is that whenever I'm in the Palestine, when I did this film, which was for CNN, and I went across to shoot stuff in the West Bank, and I told people I was working for CNN, oh, ZNN, Zionist News Network. I'd go to the, you know, Israeli side and I'd get the equivalent.
No, what do you think?
What do I think?
I
think CNN's doing a great job. Might not like everything that they report. I might not like the way some people say some things, but overall, I think that they're doing a balanced job.
Because during the last Lebanon war, we had like this, CNN is not doing an honest report about Israel.
It's really hard to, well, you know, I watched their reporting pretty carefully, and there seemed to me to be as many stories about Israeli towns that were getting hit with missiles and what Israelis were going through as there were. I think there was clearly more blood being spilled and more people dying on the Lebanese side because of the quality of the weaponry. And you know, hot pictures always win the newsroom war. It's a lot easier to say, oh man, just go with the hottest pictures, as opposed to let's show where everything is safe and it's okay. You know, so you know, did they probably show more Lebanese blood? Well, they probably did, and there probably was more Lebanese blood. So as far as I'm concerned, you know, I think CNN does a great job, but I'm probably biased, even though I left there 6 years ago. Pammy?
Well, you spoke about effective war on terrorism and about the separation barrier and the security barrier. And in fact, as you probably know, in the meantime that the barrier was built, the IDF, the Israeli army, went into the West Bank again, into the cities, and it's still there. So, would you agree that perhaps the key for Israel to reduce terrorism is for now to stay in the territories, and maybe even more than it is right now, maybe return to Gaza?
You know, it's in order to get peace, that line between total security and you know and being able to negotiate by giving something away is a very, very difficult line. When do you move it? When do you move it one way or the other? And you know, I'm a fan of the fence, frankly. I don't like it where it's being used as a land grab. I don't like it, you know, where it's being used in ways that, you know, the Israeli Supreme Court, for example, has repeatedly knocked down where it's been run in certain places. But it's stopping people from killing each other, and it's stopping the eternal cycle of retribution and violence and revenge. But you know, even though I think obviously it increases danger, I think the more checkpoints that they can get out of the West Bank, the more they can let people live normal lives, the more dignity they can give them in their daily lives, the better. It just reduces tension, it reduces hatred, but you give up some security with that, and how you do that.
Well, just one small thing. If you consider the balance between security you can gain right now by the way things are or increasing presence in the territories, and on the other hand, the real prospects of peace, you know, in the near future, what do you think is stronger? Do you think the prospects for peace are strong enough to justify, you know, taking the risk of taking the army out of the territories, withdrawing?
Well, I mean, you know, it's sort of like the West Bank and Gaza are becoming two separate countries in a certain sense right now, and I think you know, the Palestinians of the West Bank don't seem to be that upset about it. So I think that in some ways you could you could almost pull a lot of stuff out of the West Bank and at the same time act very forcefully in Gaza. And I don't think it would necessarily, I mean, obviously make a difference, but I think that they could get away with that. I mean, you know, the Gaza situation is awful. You know, I think reoccupying it is awful too. But I don't know.
Yeah, as I hear you talk and many others in Israel as well as elsewhere, what do you think about the idea of Israel becoming a secular state?
I already thought it was. I mean, no one there is kosher as I've ever met, but you know, I mean,
that's what I'm
you know,
concerned.
What do I? You know, that's too deep a question for a mere journalist. You know, I mean, you know, the odd thing, of course, about Israel when you go there for the first time is it's so much, you know, so many few people are observant than American Jews. Almost, you know, very few people except the Orthodox are kosher. I mean, it is much more of a secular Jewish community than we are over here in so many ways. So, you know, but that's really all I have to offer on that one.
I was reading, I believe it was the Inquirer, Philadelphia Inquirer.
Not the National.
Not today, but a few months ago. That the worry, and they were interviewing people, that the worry is that in the West Bank, Gaza, that a lot of people are leaving the intellectual, and it's becoming brain lit. I mean, it's really worrisome because of the.
It's happening in Israel too.
What?
It's happening in Israel too.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people are
That
fleeing from there, and a lot of the
time.
Lebanese, you know, intellectuals are leaving. Who the hell wants to stay around there if you can get out of there?
Yeah, but Bob is who were you left there with, and the infrastructure is so poor. This is the real.
It's a problem. I don't know if there's any solution. I think anybody who could get their family out of a war zone will, you know, and that's just inevitable.
You mentioned earlier about the different, what I would call the worldview of Arab minds and Western European minds and looking to the past, and us Western Europeans more concerned about the future. And you talked about Spanish loss of, you know, the Arabs of Spain, but there's also been talk about Al-Qaeda going back to the Crusades. And
oh, yeah, you hear that language, the Crusades.
Yeah. And there's also more recently, I think, you know, the betrayal by the British of the promise that if they fought against the Turks, that they would be given an Arab state after World War I. So, I mean, all this different worldviews. How you're a U.S. Jew. What can you do as a journalist to help more U.S. Jews understand the difference in worldviews and maybe get us to change our worldviews?
Well, all you can do as a journalist is try to tell stories the way, you know, look, I'm an independent filmmaker, so I've got dozens of projects that I've tried to do, you know, from a 3-hour film about the Muslim Brotherhood to a magazine piece about a rock and roller woman known as the Muslim Madonna. You know, you only, you know, and you know, I guess out in the entertainment industry, you know what in development means. You know, these are things that are languishing because there's so many great ideas, there's so many films I want to make, but there's only so many people who are willing to pay for them, and that's an eternal challenge because quite often the things that I think will add depth to these kind of issues, you just can't get on American television. You'll have much more success if you're a British filmmaker or a French or a German filmmaker in particular. It's tough because the marketplace here is, let's do Survivor 15. You know, you know, there isn't a lot of interest in smart TV, and that's an eternal challenge.
So because all the intellectuals is left?
What can people say? We're, you know, in the U.S. community. What do we do in order to change our worldviews or at least understand?
Well, you know, I mean, look, there's a lot of information out there. You don't have to take the information that's handed to you from the usual suspects. You can read Haaretz every day, and you can read the Jerusalem Post every day in English, and they say very different things quite often about the same events. But you know, you can do that. You can read An Nahar from Beirut. You can read the Daily Star from Beirut. There isn't really a Palestinian, you know, the Palestinian press is really you know, in bad shape. You know, you can read Al Hayat, you know, which is Egyptian, but also an English language website. You can, you know, expose yourself to stuff that you wouldn't, you know, read stuff that makes you want to rip the pages up sometimes. I mean, if you want to understand, you gotta expose yourself to it. I mean, read The Economist. I mean, you know, it's out there. You just have got to get beyond. Yes, read the stuff that, you know, that's, you know, go team. It's what I want to hear. But, you know, read the other stuff too. Ruth.
So, not that I don't think there's problems in Iran, but do you not think that the American press has been giving Ahmadinejad a little bit more, if that was Katie's term for him, a little bit more,
I missed that.
You never heard that? Oh, that's how Katie remembers how to say his name.
Oh yeah,
She calls him Ahmadinejad.
Okay.
Haven't we been giving him more credibility than he really has, in his own country, you know, primarily in his own country, with his people and with who really runs Iran?
I think he's been really, you know, a brilliant propagandist by coming here, going to Colombia, knowing that it's going to provoke a huge thing, and then it's going to generate the press. He doesn't have to do a damn thing.
Hasn't the press been complicit in that? I mean, we have
Well, I
really
think the
built
press
him
is.
up,
I think the press is.
not that you know, into more than I think he is. I think that's where I'm going.
I think post 9/11 that the American press has done just an unbelievably appalling job. You know, the book, what was it, On Bended Knee, about the press and the Bush presidency after 9/11, which is, it was very hard, you know, it was very, very hard to ask the tough questions when so many Americans had died. So I think overall that the press has done a really foul job of you know, of holding government accountable, which ultimately is our job. You know, that's why this country is different than other ones, is because those in power should be and can be questioned by the press in a way that's unlike most other places. But you know, Ahmadinejad, yeah, you know, just as they've reacted, I mean, you know, the technology of live TV and, you know, the internet, everything moves so fast now that it's that job of being a journalist where you get time to stand back and say, is this an important story or not an important story? It just doesn't exist anymore. So it's harder and harder and harder for the press not just to react, to run to the, you know, the siren, to chase the ambulance, to chase the wacko Iranian politician. It's a very, very tough job.
This needs to be the last question.
Hasn't asked a question.
This is the last question.
Okay.
I'm wondering if we're just not asking the right question, or we're coming in too late in the story, and how do we get back to principles and values that have the ignorance of have really empowered all of these things to be happening. We could talk about stopping terrorism, but we still haven't gotten to human rights. We still haven't gotten to people having enough to eat. And are we, you know, we're just trying to deal with the sore rather than the cause of it.
Yep.
What do we do about that?
We need to get back to keep trying to do the right thing outside. Yeah.